So, it's day 14. For 2 straight weeks, I've been using AI as a mirror, trying to examine every single prompt, every shortcut, every pattern in my thinking. And I can now tell you, with incredible detail, exactly how my logic is flawed. I've got names for it all: the iteration illusion, the permission loop. And after all that, I found I'm just making the same mistakes, only now I have this fancy new vocabulary to describe them. Okay, let's just dive right into this, because this quote, it gets to the absolute heart of the frustration, right? I mean, I have a whole back catalog of these explainers documenting my patterns, and yet yesterday I caught myself asking the AI to validate a simple decision again, the exact same pattern I had just finished analyzing. And it wasn't that I forgot the analysis, I remembered it perfectly, even as I was doing the thing. So what is going on here? That's the real puzzle I set out to solve. And, this whole thing led me to really map out the pattern itself. I realized I was stuck. I was caught in a loop, a cycle that feels exactly like progress, but is actually just a really sophisticated and comfortable trap. So let's actually break down what that cycle looks like. Okay, so here's the cycle. And what's so wild about it is how logical it all feels. It starts with step 1. You recognize a flawed pattern. A real moment of clarity, you see it. Then you move into what feels like the real work. Step 2, you document it. Step 3, you analyze it. Maybe you even use an AI to help chart out all the triggers. And this leads to step 4, where you feel this rush of insight. You get this genuine feeling of, I've got it. But then the pressure hits. You're tired, your ego's on the line, and bam, step 5. You do the exact same flawed thing all over again. The cycle repeats, except each time you go through it, your analysis just gets a little bit smarter. And this slide just lays out the core delusion perfectly. What feels like progress through documentation is really just an intellectual performance. You're putting on a show for yourself. What feels like growth through analysis, well, that's just a more and more sophisticated way of describing yourself. You think you're solving the problem by examining it, but in reality, your behavior is completely static. I was becoming an expert at describing my own cage, not figuring out how to escape it. Okay, so why? Why does this happen? Why is just knowing something so often powerless against what we actually do? Well, to really get this, we have to look at the very architecture of our minds. And for that, the work of Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman, well, it gives us the perfect blueprint. So Kahneman talks about our thinking not as a single unified thing, but as a constant back and forth between two totally different systems. You got system 1, that's your fast, intuitive gut reaction self. And then you have system 2, that's your slow, analytical, deliberate self. And the gap between these two, that is exactly where this metacognitive trap is set. And here's the crucial point, the absolute kicker. All of my hard work, all that documentation, all of that analysis, it was all feeding system 2, the thinker. I was making my thinker smarter. But my actual behavior, especially when I'm stressed or tired, that defaults to system 1, the doer. And system 1 is fast, it's automatic, and it does not pause to consult the beautiful library of insights that I've so carefully built over in system 2. Realizing this was a total game changer for me. It meant this isn't some failure of willpower or a flaw in my character. It's a structural problem. It's a feature, not a bug, of how we think. The knowledge is in one department of the mind, but the action originates from another, and there's no automatic bridge connecting them. Alright, so if this whole analysis loop doesn't actually create change, why is it so damn compelling? Why do we stay stuck in it? For this, a concept from the anthropologist David Graeber provides this really powerful and frankly pretty uncomfortable metaphor. Graeber's book, Bullshit Jobs, describes roles in our economy that are filled with activity. Meetings, reports, processes, but they create no real value. The employee feels busy, they feel important, but deep down they know it's all pointless. And I started to wonder, wait a minute, has my system 2 created a bullshit job for itself? And when I put my own mental activity into this framework, man, the parallels were just stunning. On the left, you see the features of a bullshit job. On the right, you see my metacognitive work. I was totally focused on the process of analysis, not the outcome of change. I was producing these impressive reports, my detailed chat logs. I was creating tasks to look busy, like prompting the AI to explain my patterns to me. And the result? This nagging feeling of pointlessness, because nothing was actually changing. My mind had created the perfect job to avoid the real, uncomfortable work of doing things differently. The tools we use can either help us bridge that gap between thinking and doing, or they can make it even wider. And I started to realize my AI chat interface, my mirror, was actually reinforcing the trap. This immediately brought to mind the work of media theorist Neil Postman. Yeah, in his book Amusing Ourselves to Death, Postman describes how certain media create what he called a peekaboo world. Information just pops into view for a moment and then vanishes. It's a stream of disconnected facts that entertains us, but it doesn't demand context or action. And I realized that is a perfect description of my chat history with the AI. Think about it. Each insight was an isolated event in the chat log, disconnected from the one before and the one after. There was no link between analyzing a problem and the real-world context where I would face that problem next. It was just a stream of data about myself, making it incredibly easy to observe my patterns, but incredibly difficult to integrate those observations into my actual life. Okay, so this brings us to the final, and maybe the most crucial piece of the diagnosis. I was running this whole experiment, this whole process of self-improvement, but I was measuring my success with completely broken metrics. In his book, Measure What Matters, John Doerr uses the infamous story of the Ford Pinto to show the danger of measuring the wrong things. The engineering team hit their targets perfectly. The car was under 2,000 pounds and under $2,000. But because safety wasn't a key metric, the result was a catastrophe. The team succeeded at their goals, but they failed at their purpose. And that story just brilliantly illustrates my own flawed performance review. I was giving myself points for identifying patterns, for the sophistication of my analysis, for how well I could prompt an AI to explain myself to me. But I wasn't measuring the one thing that actually mattered. Did I interrupt the pattern? Did I try a new behavior? I was celebrating how well I could describe the cage instead of counting how many times I actually tried to open the door. And the data from my AI mirror made this painfully clear. I did a quick audit of my prompts over the last 14 days. The number of prompts focused on analysis, on understanding, was sky high. The number of prompts focused on action, on doing differently, was practically zero. The evidence was right there in black and white. So when you put all these pieces together, the dual process brain, the bullshit job metaphor, the peekaboo environment, and the flawed metrics, it all points to one clear diagnosis. It gives a name to the cage I had built for myself. This is the metacognition trap. It's that paradoxical state where the very act of thinking about the problem becomes the primary thing preventing you from solving the problem. The analysis becomes a comfortable, intellectual hiding place from the messy, difficult reality of change. And once you know what to look for, you can see the trap's signature everywhere in the chat history. It looks like this: a deeply insightful prompt asking the AI to help me understand a pattern, like my need for validation, and then, just minutes later, a prompt that perfectly executes that exact pattern, asking the AI to validate a decision. Analysis, followed immediately by action that ignores the analysis. This has been the hardest lesson of the last 14 days. A perfect, precise description of the problem offers zero defense against the problem itself. Recognizing the trap doesn't mean you can resist it, it just means you have a better view from inside the cage. So, after 2 weeks of intense documentation, I haven't found the key. I've just drawn a much more precise map of the cage. Which leaves me, and maybe you, with this final question. If describing the cage isn't the key, what is? That's what I'll be exploring next.